evil clowns you've seen in the movies, well, it came to life in this case.
When your mom was growing up, was she fascinated with clowns?
She was. She even painted pictures of them. My mother, Marlene Warren, was a beautiful person. She was loving, caring, kind.
On May 26, 1990, a woman answered her door in front of her 21-year-old son and saw a clown at the door handing her balloons and flowers.
That was the worst day of my life. We were eating breakfast. We saw the colors of the reflections through the glass. It looked like a clown costume. My mother opened the door and I heard, "How pretty." And I heard bang. I saw her fall and I ran toward her as the clown was walking away, and I saw that she'd been shot in the face. At that moment, I felt my heart, my soul just rip out of my body.
What did you see on the clown's face?
Well, it was a white face, nose, orangish red hair, and it was just a clown suit.
What does the clown do?
Calmly walks right back to the car, like nothing happened.
A person disguised as a clown walked up to Marlene Warren's Aero Club home in Wellington and shot her in the mouth.
I was working as a prosecutor here in this office when it happened, and it was big news.
Meanwhile, at her home, investigators gather evidence searching for clues.
Killing with a great costume to conceal one's identity. And anybody passing by would probably say, "Oh, isn't that nice? Somebody's getting flowers." It wouldn't be suspicious, and it would certainly make for the perfect crime.
Marlene Warren was someone without any known enemies, someone who cared deeply about her family, and they lived in a home in a pretty secluded part of Palm Beach County.
Michael Warren was married to Marlene Warren. Michael was a local businessman in the car business. The Warrens' marriage seemed to be an ideal marriage, but for the people on the inside that knew better, Marlene was expressing issues with Michael Warren. The people closest to Michael Warren that worked with him knew there was something wrong because they were observing Michael Warren's interactions with a woman by the name of Sheila Keene.
And the rumors was what about Sheila and Mike?
Well, it was more than a rumor that Sheila Keene and Michael Warren were having an affair. It was not hidden from any of the employees.
In the hours after the murder of Marlene Warren, the suspects became clear it was Sheila Keene and was Michael Warren, but Michael Warren had an alibi. Michael and Sheila thought that they could get away with anything.
It took over 30 years to make sense of it all.
This house was the scene of a bizarre murder.
That shooter, a clown, carrying flowers and balloons.
It's easy to see why this case has so much interest. Who isn't afraid of a killer clown?
The 1990 murder of Marlene Warren, shot by someone dressed as a clown, haunted not just the public, but the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office. Despite identifying 2 suspects, the case for decades went unsolved. Dave Ehrenberg is the current state attorney.
This was an assassination. This was not a random act of violence. This was not a robbery.
The unknowingness of this heinous crime, the fear, it was hell.
Joe Aarons was 21, living at home with his stepfather Mike and his mother Marlene when she was murdered.
She was a good mother. Everything she did, she took pride in.
The morning of May 26, 1990, had started as a cheerful one. Joe, recuperating from a broken leg, was having breakfast at home with his mom and 3 friends when they saw a clown approaching, carrying balloons and flowers.
And we kind of figured I had a cast on. Somebody was sending to heal and for gesture.
This is like, oh, what a delightful gift to cheer you up with your broken leg, right?
My mother opened the door, and then we heard bang, and she fell. At that point, we knew something was wrong. My mother was struggling to breathe, and then I jumped to the phone. Called 911 right away.
As the clown slowly and silently walked to a car, Joe and some of his friends tried to get a closer look at anything that might help describe the disguised attacker.
The only thing that didn't have any color on it was the shoes that were solid black and the white gloves.
And did you notice anything about the clown's eyes?
I did. That's the most thing I saw was the big brown eyes.
And the clown gets in the car. What kind of car was it?
It was a white LeBaron.
And does the car peel off?
No. It just goes into gear and drives off like nothing happened.
While some of Joe's friends remained at his house waiting for EMS, Joe got into Marlene's car and tried to chase down the clown, but he couldn't catch up. He is seen here back home afterwards, where TV news crews were on the scene. Meanwhile, with the clown's balloons and flowers left behind, Marlene was rushed to the hospital, barely alive, where she was put on life support.
I kept telling her I love her and I don't want her to go and please don't leave me.
2 days later, with no hope of a recovery, life support was removed and Marlene died.
I knew my life was going to change and I knew it was going to become hell because she wasn't here to help me.
A top clue the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office had was Joe's description of the clown. About 6'1", tall, skinny, with orange hair, a red nose, and a big orange smile, and male. And those balloons left behind, they now seemed cruelly mocking. "You're the greatest," one said. The other had a picture of Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Authorities had also spoken with Joe's stepfather, Mike Warren, who they learned had an alibi. He was in a car with friends heading to a racetrack when the shooting took place.
Growing up with Mike Warren, what was that like? Was he a good dad?
I thought so. That's the only father I knew. I mean, I was really young when my real father and mother separated.
Marlene and Mike were married when Joe was just 3. They had built a comfortable life in Wellington, Florida, an affluent suburb. Marlene owned several businesses, including apartment complexes, and the couple ran Bargain Motors, specializing in used cars and rentals. While business was good, the marriage, says Joe, was troubled. He says his mother became convinced Mike was having an affair, making her fearful.
She said, if anything does happen to me, your father did it.
She said that to you?
I told her, no way, he would never do anything like that. She said, don't put it past him.
Marlene shared that same fear with her mother, Shirley Twing.
She says, if anything happens to me, Mike did it.
We interviewed Shirley in 2017 when 48 Hours started investigating Marlene's murder.
That's an ominous thing to say. Did you sense fear in her voice?
Sure. Yes, I did.
So when Shirley learned her daughter had been murdered, her mind went to Mike.
Right away. I figured Mike had something to do with it, that's for damn sure.
But Mike had that alibi, so authorities were looking for someone else. And when they visited Bargain Motors, Mike's place of business, one name kept popping up. That woman with whom Mike was supposedly having an affair.
Everybody at the Bargain Motors were reporting that you should look first at Sheila Keene.
Aletha McRoberts, an assistant state attorney in Palm Beach County, has worked on the case from the beginning.
And within the next day or so, tips were being called in that you really should investigate Sheila Keene and Michael Warren.
They were definitely seeing one another.
Della Ward worked at Bargain Motors with Mike Warren.
He had a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, and people just were drawn to him, especially women.
One of those women, Della believed, was Sheila Keene.
I found her very nice, very bubbly. You knew the way she looked at Michael, you loved him, you could see it.
Sheila, who also had a reputation for toughness, was a repo woman, repossessing cars at Bargain Motors.
To do repos, you have to have some kind of guts. She told me, I keep a gun for my protection, because people are crazy what they do.
Sheila told investigators she was out working at the time of Marlene's murder.
She claimed that she was looking for repossession vehicles, but she was unable to provide any address that she went to so that they could follow up and confirm it.
As for the affair, both Sheila and Mike told investigators they were just friends. But that's not what authorities learned when they talked to Sheila's neighbors.
The neighbors at that apartment complex believed that Michael Warren and Sheila Keene were husband and wife.
Is there any doubt in your mind that there was a romantic relationship?
There's no doubt. And they didn't hide it.
An affair, though, isn't necessarily a motive for murder.
Did anyone profit financially from Marlene's death?
Yes. So Michael Warren profited largely. The properties and assets that they owned together were in her name. So by her predeceasing him, he was able to obtain 100% of the assets.
Investigators were also trying to locate local stores that had recently sold clown outfits. Deborah Offord had been working at a costume shop when 2 nights before Marlene's murder, a customer knocked at the door at closing time.
She wanted to see the clown costumes. I said, can you come back tomorrow? And she said, no, I need something right now.
Deborah told investigators the customer paid cash, buying a clown suit, an orange wig, makeup, and a red clown nose.
She was, I would say, about 5'10", long, thick, straight, like chocolate color hair, big brown eyes.
Detectives later presented Deborah with a photo lineup that included a picture of Sheila Keene. Deborah identified Keene and one other woman as possibly being the person who bought the clown costume. The sheriff's office also believed they located where the shooter bought those flowers and balloons. This supermarket.
The buyer described as a white female with dark brown hair.
The description of the customer given by the worker at the supermarket, brown hair, and at the costume store, brown hair, brown eyes, was consistent with Sheila Keene. And there was Sheila's reported affair with Mike Warren. It was intriguing circumstantial evidence, but would it be enough to make an arrest?
Before they turned the machine off on my mother.
God, I wish you could be here with me.
I told her that I loved her very much and that we were going to get justice.
As Joe Aarons mourned the loss of his mother, Marlene, investigators continued looking for additional evidence tying Sheila Keene to Marlene Warren's murder.
You talk about this case to anyone, and the first place people go is, yeah, it's the mistress. So investigators focused on Sheila Keene.
And soon, a big break when detectives located this abandoned white Chrysler LeBaron, matching the description witnesses gave of the getaway car.
What was found inside that Chrysler LeBaron?
There was synthetic fibers, similar type fibers to a clown wig.
They were orange, the same color as the wig Joe Aaron says the assailant was wearing. Also inside the car, they found a human hair. It was brown, like Sheila Keene's.
Sheriff's detectives executed a search warrant at the home of Sheila Keene.
Inside Sheila Keene's closet, detectives say they recovered orange fibers that a forensic examination later concluded were similar to the ones found in the Chrysler LeBaron. And another breakthrough was made when Sheila's hair from her apartment was compared to the one recovered from the getaway car.
That was scientifically, microscopically examined and found to be consistent.
Consistent with Sheila's hair, but DNA technology was still in its infancy in 1990, and scientists were unable to make a definitive connection. There were other challenges for investigators. The gun used to kill Marlene and the actual costume the killer clown wore were never found. And remember, Joe thought the attacker was a 6-foot-tall man. Sheila didn't fit either of those descriptions.
We're talking about an event that took seconds. Glances of this clown was a second or two.
Also, McRoberts says any eyewitness would have a hard time describing someone in a baggy clown costume, makeup, and a wig.
It's basically a clown is a clown.
And there was Sheila's alleged affair with Mike Warren. Those fiber and hair results, and those sales clerks at the costume and grocery stores whose description of the customer purchasing the clown outfit, balloons, and flowers was consistent with Sheila.
This sounds like the evidence is really building up. It's like you've got enough there to make an arrest. What happens?
Well, there was certainly argument about that and opinions that differed at the time. And then there's an indecision about, do I do it now or should we keep trying and get a little bit more?
As investigators looked for more evidence, they discovered that Mike Warren's business, Bargain Motors, was connected to the suspected getaway car. They learned an employee stole the car from a competitor several weeks before the murder.
And that's how they got the Chrysler LeBaron.
Sheriff's detectives spent about 5 hours Thursday night searching the offices of Bargain Motors at...
And as they investigated Mike Warren's business, they discovered widespread fraud, charging him with racketeering, insurance fraud, and odometer tampering. He ultimately was convicted on 43 counts of fraud and sent to prison.
It was for fraud, and so you just can't extrapolate one to the next. I mean, there's no evidence that he's a murderer. We do have our suspicions, though.
He was not charged with any crime in connection with Marlene's murder. And Warren felt he was a victim in this case, sentiments he shared in a radio interview before he went to prison.
They wanted to put me out of business.
Warren speculated that Marlene might actually have been the victim of an angry tenant or car buyer.
I really can't think of a reason why, other than the fact of the type of businesses that we're in, as far as them landlords and crossing a few people by repossessing their car.
But law enforcement did not think Marlene Warren's murder was the work of a disgruntled tenant or customer. And as the years passed, the case grew cold. And as for Sheila Keene, she seemed to disappear.
Nobody ever brought her name up again.
For many years, I was suffering in despair.
After Mike Warren went to prison, Joe says he and his stepfather became estranged. And as he continued to grieve the loss of his mother, he was consumed by her case going unsolved.
And give me a sense of what problems you fell into after your mother's murder.
Wow, where do we start? Alcoholism, drugs, you name it.
It was especially painful, says Joe, on each passing anniversary of the shooting.
I would blow up that day and go get drunk, and just go to her gravesite. It was sad.
Would you go out to her grave to talk to her?
I did, a lot. to try to find answers, but I was so confused. I was getting nothing. I was just lost.
I miss you. I wish you could help me through these hard times.
Joe eventually emerged from the fog of drugs and despair. With that behind him, he became increasingly certain of who murdered his mother.
I concluded that Sheila was the one that did it.
She probably never thought in a million years she'd be held accountable for her crimes. She thought she got away with it.
What do you make of the evidence against Sheila Keene? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
These are paintings that Marlene had painted when she was about 14 years old. I kind of grin because I can almost see her doing this.
Shirley Twing and her daughter Marlene shared a fascination with clowns.
And over here.
In Shirley's home, she even kept a room full of clown art and figurines.
This one says to me, things will get better.
The sad, sometimes unsettling images brought comfort to Shirley, despite the fact that a clown had so brutally ended her daughter's life.
I don't hate clowns. I just hate one.
Although the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office hadn't given up on solving Marlene's murder, 27 long years had passed without an arrest. Then, by 2017, a cold case unit made a breakthrough. State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg finally had new, important evidence.
The hairs that were found in the LeBaron were able to be traced to Sheila Keene through DNA technology.
With that new DNA match, detectives believed they could now definitively connect Sheila to the alleged getaway car and to Marlene Warren's murder. And when sheriffs found suspect Sheila Keene, they were blown away to learn whom she had married.
After Michael Warren got out of prison, he reconnected with Sheila Keene. Here's someone whose wife had been murdered, and he just married the chief suspect.
What did that tell you?
When you combine the fact that the two of them were in an affair at the time of the murder, and then later they got married, it did seem like mission accomplished.
That marriage was in 2002. The Warrens, now middle-aged, settled into a new life in Tennessee, running this burger joint called Purple Cow. She took Mike's last name, but in an interesting twist, Assistant State Attorney Aletha McRoberts says she changed her first name.
Sheila Keene Warren introduced herself to their friends in that life that her name was Debbie. She had dyed her hair blonde, changed her name, and was living a full life.
We would have dinners. They were wonderful cooks.
The Warrens befriended Brooke Blevins.
This is Mike Warren's house.
A neighbor at a weekend property the couple purchased in the Virginia mountains. When we spoke to Brooke in 2018, she said she knew Mike's wife as Debbie and was told it was a childhood nickname.
Her dad nicknamed her that when she was small.
I never called her Sheila. I always called her Debbie.
Former Purple Cow employees Ashley Sexton and Cynthia Swafford say they knew Debbie as a tough boss.
I mean, she was awful aggressive, mean.
And even heard an alarming rumor about her past.
The rumor around Purple Cow when we worked there was Debbie killed Mike's ex-wife. I thought they was blowing off steam. I was like, okay, whatever. But the rumors said it more than once, even to where we knew she dressed up like a clown.
According to an employee, Sheila had appeared in clown makeup at the restaurant one year during Halloween. By the fall of 2017, the Warrens had sold the business and retired full-time to the house in Virginia. Meanwhile, State Attorney Ehrenberg felt the case against Sheila had only gotten stronger.
When you combine the fact that they got married and seemingly lived happily ever after with the new DNA breakthrough, we're able to get enough evidence to make an arrest.
On September 26, 2017, 27 years after Marlene's murder, authorities arrested Sheila Keene Warren driving on a road near their home. She was charged with first-degree murder.
Sheila did not murder Marlene Warren.
Greg Rosenfeld, Sheila Keene Warren's defense attorney, says Sheila was not the shooter.
Everything was so methodical. This person walking up to the house, committing this shooting, and then slowly walking away. We're dealing with someone who had experience in committing a hit or a murder.
That's not Sheila.
That is not Sheila.
Shortly after Sheila's arrest, Dave Ehrenberg addressed reporters.
Today, we filed notice of intent to seek the death penalty in this case.
Can you say whether Michael Warren is a suspect?
I can't say that.
Aletha McRoberts says there was something Sheila asked as she was being taken into custody that caught prosecutors' attention.
One of the first things she said is, well, are you going to arrest him too? Pointing to her husband.
Which suggests what to you?
That she knew exactly what she was being arrested for, and they had done it together.
Joe had come to the same conclusion, that his stepfather and Sheila were both involved in his mother's murder.
Would you like to see Mike Warren charged in the murder of your mother?
Yes, I would.
With Sheila in custody, we wanted to speak with Mike Warren.
We're going to go to his front door, give it a knock, and see if he'll answer a couple of questions.
After the arrest of Sheila Keene Warren in 2017, 48 Hours wanted to talk to Mike Warren about what he knew about his wife's murder.
Here he comes. Hey, Mike. I'm Peter Van Sant with CBS News.
He wouldn't open the door, but we spoke through it for several minutes, competing with a barking dog.
Did you have anything to do with planning the murder of your wife, Marlene? You did not.
He was adamant that neither he nor Sheila Keene Warren had anything to do with Marlene's murder.
Did you suggest to Sheila that she dress in a clown outfit?
You're saying Sheila. Who said Sheila did that? I don't think she had anything to do with it. If I thought she had something to do with it, I wouldn't have done with it.
Do you believe, based on the evidence over the years, that Mike Warren knew what was going to happen that day?
I don't believe there's any direct evidence of that.
There just wasn't enough evidence to prosecute Michael Warren. But if evidence emerges, we'll pursue it.
As they prepared for trial, despite never recovering the clown disguise or the gun, prosecutors were confident they could prove that Sheila Keene Warren committed the murder so that she could marry Mike Warren.
Sheila Keene Warren had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to do this.
We will never know who killed Marlene Warren because the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office did such a poor job investigating this case. I can tell you without question that it was not Sheila Keene.
Sheila Keene Warren's defense attorney, Greg Rosenfeld, says she's innocent, a victim of the state attorney's reckless desire to close a notorious cold case.
And they said, you know what, this is our suspect. We're going to stick with it, even though the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit the puzzle.
Rosenfeld says there were other potential suspects authorities ignored, including an inmate who supposedly bragged in prison about murdering Marlene. But prosecutors say he was investigated and cleared.
It's not surprising that they would try to point the finger at law enforcement for not looking at every potential suspect. But if you look at the evidence, it pointed to one person all along, Sheila Keene Warren.
The state was confident Sheila Keene Warren was responsible for Marlene's murder, But Rosenfeld plans to poke holes in its case at trial.
How do you overcome DNA evidence?
The state attorney's office should be embarrassed about the DNA evidence in this case.
Rosenfeld agrees the hair prosecutors say was found in the LeBaron getaway car could be from Sheila Keene Warren. But he says it could also be from about 4% of the U.S. Caucasian population.
They couldn't exclude Marlene Warren from that hair sample. So that was their groundbreaking DNA evidence.
And if you concede that the hair is from Sheila Keene Warren, says Rosenfeld, there's an innocent explanation as to how it got there. The LeBaron was on the lot at Bargain Motors where she worked.
Sheila may have been in the car used in this murder. That's it.
The defense attorney says, well, of course her hair might be in there. It doesn't suggest that she was driving at the time of the murder. What do you say to that?
It's just one more link. Once you put that one thing with the totality of all the circumstances, then it starts to become overwhelming.
Rosenfeld says the orange fibers found in the car, which prosecutors say could be from the clown costume, should also be excluded.
So the fibers found in the car were synthetic fibers. That same type of fiber could be used in thousands of different products. So the state likes to present it as clown wig fibers, but that's factually incorrect.
Even more troubling than the evidence gathered, says Rosenfeld, is how it was handled over the decades.
What are we looking at here?
These are evidence bags at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Evidence Unit, torn open. Just gaping holes in these evidence bags.
If there's gaping holes, what can that do to the evidence inside?
That's precisely how you have cross-contamination. Now look at, if I can zoom in here.
This bag contains a clown wig investigators purchased similar to the one they believed was worn by the assailant. They used it to compare to the fibers found in the LeBaron and in Sheila's home.
This is an open evidence bag with the wig sticking out. This is horrifying.
And so your bottom line is that this evidence is unreliable now.
Without question.
Can it not be argued that some of the evidence in this case was indeed bungled?
You know, you're asking a lot of law enforcement to be perfect from 1990 to today. Some of the evidence was kept in an evidence storage area that wasn't ideal. Any mistake, any small opening will be exploited by defense lawyers.
Prosecutors were still certain they had the right person for Marlene's murder. But in February 2020, after a re-evaluation of Sheila Keene Warren's case, they announced they would no longer seek the death penalty.
Were you told by the prosecutor's office that there was always a chance in a jury trial that she might even be acquitted?
Yes.
See more evidence from the case at 48hours.com.
When you think of your mom today, what do you think about? What images come to mind?
Well, she was robbed, and so was I.
It is said the wheels of justice turn slowly, and when it came to the murder of Marlene Warren, that grind often seemed to come to a halt. After the 27-year wait for an arrest, Sheila Keene Warren's trial kept getting delayed. By 2022, she had spent 5 years in jail. Her trial postponed 6 times.
And then we had COVID. So it just was one thing after another. Decades of accumulation of files and photographs and mountains of evidence and documents.
Defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld was also trying to work his way through all that evidence. And he says adding to the delays was a lack of cooperation from the state.
Evidence kept, I'd say, disappearing.
Rosenfeld says one crucial piece of evidence for the defense that disappeared for years was what investigators called the clown sighting file.
These were all the tips about people who alleged to have seen clowns in the area.
That opens up for you new avenues as to possible suspects, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the sheriff's office and the state attorney's office just decided they didn't want to look for this evidence.
But then suddenly, in October of 2022, as another trial date neared, the file was found.
It was located not with the Sheila Keene clown murder boxes. It was actually a file out of place.
They find this clown setting file, and there's 35 tips. We begin to investigate them. Now we're 32 years after the murder. You know, we couldn't track down these witnesses.
I've seen it, and it's silly things. Clearly, clown sightings that had nothing to do with Marlene Warren.
And it wasn't being intentionally hidden from the defense, you're saying?
Absolutely not. We were meticulous about making sure they had everything.
Though as the trial neared, the decades of delays were causing problems for the prosecution as well.
Every day that went by, it was a tougher case. Witnesses die, memories fade, evidence spoils. One of our key witnesses passed away. He was the one who compiled the evidence, and without him, we lost a chain of custody for some crucial evidence relating to the fibers.
If I can zoom in here, this is an open evidence bag.
Evidence the defense already claimed had been poorly stored and mishandled.
Contaminated, inadmissible, unreliable. It just goes to show you how poor of an investigation that was done.
They were going to be able to argue that because of the opening of the bags, that the evidence was spoiled, and because of the break in the chain of custody, because of the death of our witnesses, it shouldn't even be admitted. So you had some real potential for reasonable doubt.
There was beyond reasonable doubt.
On April 25th, 2023, 2 weeks before Sheila Keene Warren's trial for the murder of Marlene Warren was to begin, there was yet another surprise in a case that had been filled with the unexpected. A plea deal was reached.
Ms. Keene Warren, the defendant herein, will agree to withdraw her previously entered plea of not guilty and her plea of guilty.
Sheila Keene Warren, whose case at one time included the death penalty, then life in prison, would now plead guilty to second-degree murder and be sentenced to 12 years in prison. Under sentencing guidelines for time served, she is expected to be released in 2025, perhaps sooner.
We had to make a judgment based on what we had.
Because the fear is what, if you take this to trial?
The worst thing that could happen would be that Sheila Keene Warren would be found not guilty, not because she was innocent, but because after 33 years, we could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was the one who did it.
But Sheila Keene Warren did have to publicly pay a price for this plea deal, admitting in open court that she, in fact, did murder Marlene Warren.
If this case were to proceed to jury trial, the state would present evidence that on or about May the 26th of 1990, the defendant was responsible for the death of Marlene Warren.
Ms. Keene Warren, did you hear all that?
Yes, sir.
And do you agree with that factual basis?
Yes.
Despite admitting her crime, Sheila Keene Warren, through her attorney, still maintains she is innocent.
Sheila did not commit this murder. It was very difficult for her to admit to committing a crime that she did not commit.
But as a matter of law, she has admitted to committing the murder by saying yes.
Correct, for the purpose of...
So she is a convicted murderer.
Insofar as the law goes, sure. But when you're told you can be home, or, you know, you can play Russian roulette and risk spending the rest of your life in prison, it's kind of a no-brainer.
The defense cannot have it both ways. So she will be a murderer for every day for the rest of her life. Even when she gets out of prison one day, she'll still be a convicted murderer.
When she does get out of prison, she will reunite with her husband, Michael Warren.
Sheila's going home to Tennessee. She's going back to her life.
Michael Warren, in a statement provided to 48 Hours regarding the plea, said, "My wife did not commit this crime. It was difficult to see her plea to a crime she did not commit, but it wasn't worth the gamble when she was offered a deal that'll have her home in 16 to 18 months. With this deal, there is a chance that Sheila might get out of prison within the next year or two. Are you all right with that?
Well, I'm not all right with it, but I have to be.
Still, Joe Aarons approved the plea deal, feeling it wasn't worth the gamble of going to trial.
That was very emotional because that was the end of something so huge that grew for 33 years of my life.
Finally, it's over.
Finally. You know, it was...
The demons that once occupied Joe's mind are gone, replaced with loving memories of how his mother Marlene lived, rather than how that life was so violently taken. What would you say to your mother if you could speak to her today?
Wow, what can I say to my mother? Thank you for showing me how to love and be peaceful, and thank you for being in my life.
Hurts.
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Postmortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.
When you think of the Phoenix Desert, you definitely aren't thinking of a waterfront. The canal system goes right through the center of Phoenix. The more people that were moving to the area, the more that the trails along there were being used for walking, running, biking. There are not many crimes that are like this one. You had women riding bicycles along the canal on a typical Phoenix evening, ambushed, stabbed multiple times.
Police are looking for whoever killed 22-year-old Angela Brasso.
Angela Brasso dismembered, decapitated. Police are looking at this scene and thinking, what on earth happened and who did this?
10 months later, a 17-year-old junior at Arcadia High School, Melanie Burness. This is the high school that Steven Spielberg attended. Melanie Burness's mother goes out to dinner, and Melanie decides to go on a bike ride. And the following morning, a woman is riding her bike.
Right here, there was just a big puddle. It looked different as I rode through it, and all of a sudden I'm like, that is blood.
So she called the police. The police saw a blood trail, and they see Melanie Burness's body at the bottom of the canal.
My time in my life froze at that very moment, the day we found out. I made a promise to myself. I just never stopped talking about her.
These murders became widely known as the Phoenix Canal murders.
My name is Clark Schwarzkopf, and I was assigned to the cold case unit investigating the canal murders. I think there was over 600 persons of interest. I said, okay, give me the list. In this mound of information of all these people and all these possible suspects, I believed our killer was listed.
Eventually, Detective Schwarzkopf found his prime suspect on that list and discovered that the alleged canal killer had a second identity. A man who dressed up like a comic book superhero and cruised the valley in a decorated car dripping with fake blood. the public knew this man as the Zombie Hunter.
What was his life as the Zombie Hunter like? What did he do?
He would go to like parades and festivals and show off this car and kind of be a part of the excitement, if you will.
Your assignment was to find this guy, and you have found him.
Yeah.
He is accused of being a killer, but here he is posing with police officers before they discovered what he'd done.
It was almost like a slap in the face, like, I'm here, but you don't know it.
It was like he was hiding in plain sight.
It's one of those cases that you just don't forget. You can't unsee what happened to those girls. You just can't.
Long before the man known as the Zombie Hunter became the prime suspect in the Canal murders, Clark Schwarzkopf was a detective with the Phoenix Police Department's Cold Case Squad. His mission was simple but pointed: find the killer responsible for those vicious murders of 2 young women from the early 1990s.
To this day, I'm still not exactly sure about what happened on those bike paths.
The case began on November 8, 1992. Angela Brasso, a tech worker who had recently moved to Phoenix, was taking advantage of beautiful weather to get in a little exercise, says Brianna Whitney, the true crime reporter for the CBS affiliate KPHO in Phoenix.
Each night, she would go out for her evening bike ride, just at golden hour at sunset, the best time to be riding out here.
Angela was only hours away from turning 22 years old. And like a lot of locals, she liked to bike on the paths that ran alongside the city's distinctive canals, says Schwarzkopf, a 48 Hours consultant.
Are there places that are sort of natural ambush sites if somebody wants to attack someone?
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of tunnels that go underneath the interstate.
That November evening in 1992, Angela left her apartment around 7 p.m. Her boyfriend Joe later told police. He said he stayed home to bake Angela a birthday cake and didn't expect her to be gone long.
Hours go by, and Joe grows concerned. Angela hasn't come home, and that's not like her.
Joe told police he took his bike out 3 times that night, frantically searching for Angela on the canal paths. He spoke to her friends, even her mother back in Pennsylvania. Finally, he reported Angela missing to police. The next morning, searchers came upon a horrific scene.
Angela Brasso's torso was found in a field next to the trail that she had been riding her bike on.
Angela had been stabbed to death. Some 10 days after Angela's headless body was discovered, a man fishing along this section of the canal spotted her head stuck on a grate.
And from what we have heard from witnesses, the head was in amazingly good condition, especially considering this was days after the murder. I'm Morgan Lowe, and I'll take you.
Morgan Lowe, an investigative reporter who also works at KPHO and is a consultant for 48 Hours, has been working on the Canal Killer case for more than a decade.
We've heard that the head looked like it had been preserved, like it was a memento for the killer.
Angela's purple mountain bike was also missing. There were no solid leads, and the case went quiet until September of 1993, some 10 months after Angela's murder, when the mother of 17-year-old Melanie Burness returned from a dinner date to find her daughter had broken her curfew and was not home. She then noticed that Melanie's bicycle was missing.
Melanie decides to go on a bike ride. By around 10:30, when Melanie did not return, her mother started calling her friends. Is Melanie there?
Well, my mom took the phone call, said that Melanie's mom was frantic and, nervous.
Rachel Shepmaker was one of Melanie's close friends in high school.
So initially, when you hear that her mother's looking for her, you're not thinking something terrible has happened to your friend?
Definitely not. I thought she was with a friend and just forgot to communicate with her mom where she was.
Early the next morning, Charlotte Pottle, a local resident, happened to be riding along the canal with her young daughter in a bicycle seat. Just as they came out of one of those tunnels that ran under the interstate, she spotted a puddle.
There was just a big puddle of something. Ended up riding right through it and having it splash over me.
Charlotte says something about the puddle bothered her, so a few minutes later, she doubled back. That's when she made that horrible realization.
I could tell that it was a puddle of red, that it was a puddle of blood. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking at it, I noticed that there are some drag marks that went along over here.
Toward that tree?
Towards that tree, yes. And then went around the tree and was dragged back. You could see the drag marks right here to the canal.
Charlotte went home and called police. Later that night, the local news reported that a woman's body had been found in the canal, close to where Angela Brasso's head had been located.
They found the body in a teal bodysuit. I was told by some other friends that Melanie did not own that. It can't be her.
Rachel went to sleep convinced the body in the canal was not Melanie. But the next day,
I'm at school. My friends just come up to me crying and saying it was Melanie.
detectives strongly suspected Melanie had been targeted and stabbed in the back by the same person who had killed Angela.
Police believe that somehow the killer got her off of her bike, whether he knocked her off of her bike or whether he asked her a question.
Clark says the evidence indicates the killer approached the women from behind.
Both the knife wounds were the exact same position.
Investigators say the killer dragged Melanie's body off the canal path, removed her clothes, and dressed her in that teal bodysuit, similar to this one obtained by police.
Along with the stabbing and the dismemberment, there was another component to these murders, wasn't there?
Yeah, both women were sexually assaulted.
And that meant investigators had a crucial piece of evidence: DNA.
When the DNA from Melanie's scene was finally tested later, it matched to Angela's scene, so we knew for sure that we were dealing with the same perpetrator.
Investigators noted that the initial stab wounds to the backs of each woman were fatal and so precise that detectives suspected the killer might be a surgeon.
The details about what happened were the kinds of things that kept parents from letting their kids out when the sun went down.
The murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness in the early 1990s created fear in Phoenix that lasted for a generation.
You know there's some guy out there and you don't know where he is.
They watched the news and read the newspaper every day, hoping that police would make an arrest. And it just kept going on, and nothing, and nothing, and nothing.
Investigators had collected matching male DNA from both the victims. But more than 2 decades passed, and the Canal murder cases went cold. Then, science finally caught up with the calendar.
It's in 2014. Phoenix police detectives are at a DNA conference, and a forensic genealogist from California is also at the conference.
Colleen Fitzpatrick, founder of Identifinders International, was there to meet with law enforcement.
And she goes up to these detectives and says, hey, I can take Y chromosomes and create these DNA profiles and try to match with genealogy to help solve criminal cases.
Fitzpatrick's company had developed software that could mine public genealogy databases, searching for matches to crime scene DNA. The detectives heard her out.
And then several weeks later, they sent me the Y-DNA profile from the crime scene for the Phoenix Canal murders.
Fitzpatrick's company started crunching the data, hoping to provide Phoenix detectives with a name.
We entered the numbers from the forensic profile into our software, and that's where I came up with 6 matches to the name Miller.
While the genetic genealogy search produced the name Miller, it is also one of the most common last names. Detective Schwarzkopf started digging.
You check your files, and what do you find?
I think there were a total of 6 Millers that were on what I called my master list. And I went down through the list, got to Brian Patrick Miller.
But who was Brian Patrick Miller? Records show he was 42 years old with a Phoenix address. That name was just one of more than 600 persons of interest who had lived in those case files for years. Police at the time seemingly never pursued Miller.
We discovered his file downstairs.
Police learned Brian Miller had a record dating back to before the Canal murders. In May of 1989, when he was just 16 years old, Miller crossed paths with Celeste Bentley.
I was 24, and I was going to work. I had just noticed a young boy on the bus.
Celeste says she and the boy got off at the same stop. Moments later, she felt something in her back.
He had ran by me. I thought he had just hit me. I just yelled at him. I was like, why'd you do that, you know? And then I reached back and touched my back and realized that it was blood. I had been stabbed.
With a single knife wound to her upper back, Celeste screamed and managed to make it to the store where she worked. A coworker called for help. About 30 minutes later, when Celeste was in the back of an ambulance,
the police came and said they found him, and they wanted to bring him to the ambulance to show him to me.
Celeste identified her assailant. Brian Miller was charged with aggravated assault.
They said that if he had held the blade the other way, he would have gone straight through my ribs and I could have died.
Miller pleaded guilty and was sentenced to juvenile detention until he turned 18. It was a far cry from where Miller's life had begun.
He was living in Hawaii for a while as a kid with his mom and his dad, but his dad died early on in a motorcycle accident.
Years later, Miller and his mother Ellen moved to Phoenix.
So for most of his life and early years, it was Brian Miller and his mom.
While Miller was in juvie, his mother made a disturbing discovery.
Brian Miller's mom was looking through his stuff, and she found a note that he wrote.
The pages detailed a sinister plan: kidnap the girl, tie her up in the truck, and cut her clothes off.
This note spelled out how he wanted to find, abduct, rape, murder, and dismember a young woman. And Brian's mom was so disturbed by this piece of paper that she took it to Phoenix police.
It was Miller's 18th birthday, and he had just been released as an adult.
She flat out told the police at the time that she was really scared for her safety and that she was not going to allow him to come home.
So after his release, Miller ended up at this Phoenix halfway house. When Schwarzkopf read that note in 2014, he was struck by something.
There was a lot of things in there that were close or similar to what happened specifically to Angela.
including a description of decapitating a victim and preserving the head. Phoenix police wanted to locate Miller. Luckily, he was very easy to find. In December 2014, Phoenix police continued digging into potential suspect Brian Miller, who they discovered was actually a local celebrity.
Everybody at the time in the Phoenix area knew Brian Patrick Miller as this character called the Zombie Hunter.
The Zombie Hunter, like a comic book character?
Yeah, like a comic book character, like a good guy fighting the bad guys.
Miller's alter ego was a costume figure who participated in parades and festivals around town.
Thousands of zombies taking over the streets of downtown Phoenix.
He wore this long trench coat with these goggles and helmet and had this large Gatling gun.
And if you're going to hunt zombies, you need a way to get around.
He bought an old police car and tricked it out, wrote the Zombie Hunter on it.
And it had a full-size zombie mannequin in the back and blood on the side.
Friend Eric Braverman says Miller's zombie hunter persona attracted a big fan base, including law enforcement officers who lined up to pose with him.
Collected pictures of himself with the cops like trophies. They're all smiling big with him, leaning on the car.
Eric says Miller's superhero character was the opposite of what Brian was like when he wasn't in costume.
He seemed like a harmless marshmallow that was immersed in this goofy lifestyle. He's just that unassuming guy.
But could Miller be the Canal Killer? The only way to find out was to get his DNA. Investigators began to surveil Miller, who worked at an Amazon warehouse. Every day when he got there, Miller parked the zombie mobile in the same spot.
He would come out for his 15-minute break, blast his music really loud. Lunchtime, came out to the car, same thing, blast this god-awful music.
Schwarzkopf came up with an elaborate plan to get his DNA.
I went up and introduced myself to Miller. He was in his car.
What did you introduce yourself
I introduced myself as a security consultant.
Schwarzkopf told Miller that thieves had been stealing goods from a warehouse across the way.
I said, would you be interested in working for me as a security officer, watching the building while you're outside?
Did his eyes light up?
Yeah, because it was a good paying job. I said, look, I'll pay you $20 an hour.
On January 2nd, 2015, Schwarzkopf met Miller at this Chili's restaurant to fill out a job application. The cold case unit was behind the scenes, ready to bag anything that had Miller's DNA on it, such as utensils or a glass.
They set a table for me and Mr. Miller away from everybody else in a part of the restaurant where nobody else is at.
Miller arrived with a surprise guest, his 15-year-old daughter, Sarah. Miller was a divorced single dad.
He was very gentle and caring about his daughter. He often brought his daughter where he would be going.
The trio sat down and ordered hamburgers. When the food arrived,
he swallows his hamburger in like 5 bites, won't take a drink of his water, and I'm sitting there going, are you sure you don't want something else to drink because you just got water? No, I'm good.
Schwarzkopf started to worry this operation would be a bust.
What does he finally do that makes this mission accomplished?
We finally took a drink from the water glass. That's when I knew that, okay, now we've at least got his DNA.
Despite knowing about Miller's juvenile record, as their meal ended, the veteran detective's gut told him Miller was not their man.
Seeing him with his daughter, I just don't see this guy as being the monster in 1992 and 93 that would do this to these women.
Miller gave Schwarzkopf a quick tour of his zombie hunter mobile, and the two parted ways, with the detective saying he'd be in touch. The cold case unit sent Miller's water glass off to the crime lab. 11 days later,
We got a call from the lab, and we're sitting there, and we're like, what is this all about?
And in this meeting, these Phoenix detectives say, as a joke, oh, they must have solved the Canal murders.
But Detective Schwarzkopf says it was no joke when the head of the lab arrived.
She leans down to me, she goes, it's him. I go, what? She goes, Brian Miller, it's him. Well, the blood rushed from my head. I kind of sat back and I went, you've got to be kidding.
Brian Miller's DNA from that water glass matched the DNA recovered from Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness more than 20 years before. Miller was arrested within hours. During a police interview shortly after, Miller was told why he'd been taken into custody in connection with the Canal murders.
We have DNA that links you to those two ladies.
See how that's possible.
He just kind of went through it in his dopey, kind of, I don't know what you're kind of talking about.
It would help you get it off your chest if you did something like that.
I didn't kill anyone.
You didn't kill anybody?
No.
Investigators got a search warrant for Miller's house, the home he shared with his teenage daughter, and just about everything he'd ever collected in his life.
I can remember like it was yesterday, walking up to the front door and everybody going, you can't get in that way. It's full of crap.
Brian Miller's house was like it came from the show Hoarders.
There was a little path where you could get to a bathroom and the kitchen and where the TV was, and that's it. Everything else is just stacked to the roof with garbage.
Did you look around and go, this is madness?
Not only madness, I go, this is a nightmare.
Schwarzkopf and his investigators would have to sift through all of it, looking for other possible evidence. Detective Schwarzkopf also focused on a new source, someone Miller himself had ominously singled out in his interview.
It's the one person on the face of the earth that I could probably honestly say I hate.
Miller's ex-wife, Amy, who would end up revealing gruesome details from Miller's violent past.
He had told her about the murder of a young girl who'd come to his door accidentally.
What do you think motivated Brian Miller to dress up as the Zombie Hunter? See more of the case on Facebook at 48 Hours.
In January 2015, more than 21 years after the Canal murders, Brian Miller was charged with first-degree murder in both Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness's deaths. Melanie's friend Rachel Shepmaker says she felt a wave of relief.
A very joyous moment of, oh my gosh, this is what we've been waiting for decades upon decades.
Detective Schwarzkopf wanted to talk to the one person who probably knew Miller best, his ex-wife, Amy.
They had been married for 8 years. There was a divorce.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that she was just 19 when she met Miller in 1996. They married less than a year later and moved to Everett, Washington. Amy had a shocking revelation for the detective. She told Schwarzkopf Miller had revealed a gruesome secret to her, that he had killed a young girl in Phoenix years earlier, before he'd ever met Amy. Schwarzkopf says Amy never reported it to police before for a number of reasons. She didn't know if it was true, she was afraid of Miller, and she said she wanted to be a good wife.
You support your man no matter what.
Detective Schwarzkopf says Amy told him what Miller had said.
That a young girl had come to his door, that he had grabbed this young female, pulled her in, killed her immediately.
Amy said Miller told her he dismembered the girl and disposed of her remains in trash left on the curb. Although Amy claimed Miller never told her the child's name, investigators used the information Amy provided to piece together who Miller may have been talking about.
13-year-old Brandy Myers was a little girl collecting money for a school book-a-thon in her North Phoenix neighborhood, going door to door.
I was a tomboy and she was a girly girl.
Brandy's sister, Kristen Dennis.
So she would try to learn how to climb trees or jump fences because she wanted to play with me. She was my best friend.
It was May 26, 1992, 6 months prior to the murder of Angela Brasso. Miller was living in the halfway house following his time in juvenile detention for the aggravated assault of Celeste Bentley.
This is 1 block from our school, his home, and then 3 blocks is our house. So every single day, we walked right by here.
Kristen says Brandy left home alone that evening, never to return.
She was last seen 2 doors down from Brian's, walking in the direction of his house.
Despite an extensive search, Brandy's body was never found. Schwarzkopf says even though Amy couldn't provide a name, the clues in her account add up to just one conclusion.
I believe that person is, in fact, Brandy Myers.
Her sister believes that as well.
Brandy went to the landfill like something of no importance.
Even with Amy's account, investigators did not have enough evidence to charge Miller in Brandy's disappearance.
So the fact that she was disposed of, there's just nothing physical, nothing forensically to grab onto.
48 Hours contacted Miller, who said he had no involvement in Brandy's disappearance and never confessed to Amy that he had killed a young girl. But there is another case in Miller's past.
In 2002, a woman named Melissa Ruiz Ramirez is walking down the street in Everett at night. Somebody pulls over.
It was Brian Miller. Melissa would later tell police she'd seen him before talking to a friend of hers. Melissa said she got in Miller's car and told him she needed to make a call, and he drove her to his workplace so she could use the phone.
She tells police she's on the phone, and from out of the clear blue, Brian Miller comes running out with a 12-inch serrated kitchen knife and stabs her in the back. They fight over the weapon.
Melissa said she escaped and contacted police. They picked up Miller shortly after. He didn't deny stabbing Melissa, but claimed it was self-defense. He said he was at work when Melissa walked in off the street and asked to make a call.
He said she goes to use the phone, and then all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, she tries to rob him with a knife.
Miller was arrested and charged with first-degree assault with a deadly weapon. He was jailed from May 2002 until his December trial.
The jury just didn't buy Melissa's story. It was a he said, she said, and they acquitted him of the charge.
Amy says a chilling change followed Miller's return home. She said it began with the letters she'd received from her jailed husband while he awaited trial.
They first started out as professing his innocence, and then it would turn into sexual deviance. Like, here's what I'm going to do when I get out to you.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that Miller followed up his words with action.
She said he came back with an unbelievable, ugly, dark, sexual deviant side that she'd never seen before. There were times where there was sex between them where he held a knife to her throat.
Amy told Schwarzkopf that Miller claimed something happened to him as a child, something that would become the cornerstone of his defense for murdering Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness. His unique defense?
Called her first witness.
His mother had created a monster. At the start of Brian Miller's trial for the murders of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burness in October 2022, his attorneys opened with a startling defense. They admitted their client was the canal killer.
They had to concede right off the bat that he is the actual killer, but that he was not guilty by reason of insanity.
His defense attorneys say Miller was tortured by his mother, Ellen, as a child, and that led to his violent sexual behavior. She died in 2010.
If you imagine the making of a monster, this is kind of the household that story begins in.
Miller told investigators after his arrest that the beatings began when he was just 5 years old.
She was a detention officer. Discipline in their house was mental as well as physical.
She used her security belt, so it was like a law enforcement belt, and usually I got hit by the buckle.
The defense opted for a bench trial, which meant there would be no jury. His lawyers told Judge Suzanne Cohen that Miller's mother also exposed her young son to violent sexual content.
He was exposed to her interests in pornography and extremely violent films.
Miller's lawyers said his mother's abuse caused Miller to develop severe mental health problems.
He feels like there are different TVs playing in his head.
Psychologist Bethany Brand testified that Miller developed a condition known as dissociative amnesia, an inability to remember some traumatic events. Morgan Lowe summed up the defense argument.
There were two Brians. There's the one you see over there at the defense table, who's a fairly normal person, who has friends, who had a job, who was a dad, who was a husband. And then there's the killer. There's Bad Brian.
And Miller claimed his attorneys had no memory, none, of the two murders he was charged with.
Prosecutors undermine the defense claim that Miller has no memory of the killings. They point out that he does remember details related to other stabbings.
Remember, Miller admitted stabbing Celeste Bentley when he was 16 years old. And in 2002, he had also testified about the stabbing of Melissa Ruiz Ramirez in Washington. To show Miller's deviant side, prosecutors called the only person in the world Miller said he despised, his ex-wife, Amy. The judge did not allow cameras to record her face. Under questioning by prosecutor Elizabeth Reamer, Amy testified that later in their marriage, Miller grew increasingly violent during sex.
Did you ever say anything to him about wanting it to stop because it was scary?
No.
Why not?
I was avoiding any confrontation with him at all at that point, and wanted to be as compliant as possible so that I would stay where he loved me enough not to kill me.
Did he ask permission prior to using needles on you?
No.
Did he ask permission prior to tying you up?
No.
What percentage of your sex life after he got out of jail in Washington included bondage, the pins, or other things that were not the normal sex you'd been having early in your marriage?
Probably at least 95%.
The trial continued, and after 6 months and 36 witnesses, the judge delivered her verdict.
As to count 1, first-degree murder, Angela Brasso as follows: guilty. As to count 2, first-degree murder, victim Melanie Burness as follows: guilty.
How did Brian Miller react to the guilty verdict?
He didn't react. He didn't give any real emotion.
But Angela's mother, who addressed the court remotely, was emotional.
The defendant broke my heart, took all hope and light from me and my family. The hole in my heart is so big and empty.
Melanie's older sister, Jill, also spoke remotely about how painful it was that Melanie's life ended violently at the age of 17.
For 30 years now, we've had to live without Melanie because the defendant murdered her. Words cannot even begin to describe the level of excruciating pain we experienced with the news of her horrific death.
Miller, who didn't take the stand during his trial, was allowed to give a statement before he was sentenced.
I'm not looking for sympathy today. This time is for the family and the friends of the victims. I cannot imagine what pain they have endured for all these years. I know I'm different. I thought it had to do with what my mother did to me.
Defense counsel R.J. Parker urged Judge Cohen to show mercy before she delivered her judgment on Miller's sentence, life in prison or death.
You do not have to kill Brian in order to see justice done.
Judge Cohen agreed with the centerpiece of the defense case.
The defendant's abuse as a child was proven.
But 8 months after the trial began, Miller's abuse at the hands of his mother did not dissuade Judge Cohen from handing down the ultimate sentence.
There is no question that what the defendant did deserves the death penalty. Mr. Miller, anything you wish to say to the court?
I guess thanks for listening to everything that was said and giving us at least the opportunity to try and convince you otherwise.
Justice was carried out in this case.
Detective Schwarzkopf hopes family and friends of Angela and Melanie might finally find some peace. People like Rachel Shepmaker.
Just knowing that justice was served, it doesn't make anything easier.
How do you want your good friend be remembered?
Just that she's the all-American good kid. I want her family to know that we haven't forgotten her. She's changed us all for the better. She was a gift.
A knock at the door by a clown, an evil clown.
The evil clowns you see in the movies, well, it came to life.
Who comes calling with balloons, flowers, and a gun.
I heard bang. I saw her fall. This was an assassination. Who isn't afraid of a killer clown?
48 Hours, Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
You come here for the lifestyle and the beauty and the mountains, getting to go skiing and hiking and biking. Annette Schnee was very beautiful. She had gone to a modeling school and she came here to Breckenridge.
Everybody was going to Colorado, go find yourself, go to the big town,
In 1982, on January 6th, Annette had gone from her work in Frisco at the Holiday Inn. She needed to get home to get her outfit to work at the Flipside bar that night.
She would hitchhike from her house, do her day job, hitchhike back, put on her nighttime cocktail waitress outfit, hitchhike to there, and then hitchhike back.
A lot of people hitchhiked at that time because they can't afford to drive or get a car to drive back and forth.
There was a storm, a bad storm.
It was very cold too. I think it was 20 below.
About 4:45 in the afternoon was the last time anybody saw Annette Schnee. That same night, another young woman disappeared in Breckenridge, Bobby Jo Oberholzer. Bobby Joe had received a promotion at work, and she was going to go celebrate with some friends.
Bobby Joe was free-spirited. She loved life. She was happy wherever she was.
She left and went to go hitchhike home, and that was the last time she was seen.
The day after Bobby Joe disappeared, her body was found here on the side of a snowbank on Hoosier Pass, 10 miles outside Breckenridge. She had tragically been shot. 6 months later, the body of Annette Schnee was also found about 10 miles in that direction in a desolate area, lying face down in a stream. She had also been shot. The mystery of what happened to these two beautiful young women would haunt their families and investigators for years.
These two women, they were both killed the same night. The thing that tied them both together was an orange booty sock.
You get a sock near Bobby Joe Oberholzer, and the mate to it is found on the body of Annette K. Schnee. I'm saying, this is amazing. As years went by, we mused about whether or not we were going to die before we solved this case.
What no one else knew at the time was that the killer's truck got stuck on a snowy mountain pass that same night, right after the murders.
That would be right where that curve is over there.
And there were snowbanks.
Yeah, at least that deep.
Yeah.
And a local fire chief saved him.
Everything catches up, but you don't get away with anything forever.
Every day that I made this drive and got to see all the scenery and the sunrises and sunsets, and especially from the top of Hoosier, it's like I am so lucky to live here.
But for 40 years, these towering, craggy Rockies outside Breckenridge, Colorado, held a dark and silent secret. The unsolved murders of Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. They would define the career of now Park County Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple. But back in 1982, when both women were killed,
I was a senior in high school doing high school teenage stuff. We were just basically footloose and fancy free and never giving the first thought that something could happen to us.
it was an attitude from another time, a feeling Wendy shared with Bobby Joe.
Bobby Joe Oberholzer was somebody that I think I would have been friends with.
How much is she missed by her family?
A lot, still.
Lori Merlot's memory of big sister Bobby Joe is frozen in those gentler times.
One of the best things that ever happened in my life was being her younger sister.
How do you describe her?
A free spirit, loving person.
Very pretty. You know, fell head over heels for her.
You fell hard.
Yeah, I did.
Jeff Oberholzer and Bobby Joe dated for a few years before making it official in 1977. And soon the newlyweds from the Midwest headed for the mountains.
Colorado was calling, you know.
They'd call the town of Alma, half an hour south of Breckenridge, home.
It just seemed to be the place to be, you know, us hippies.
You were a hippie back then.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And was Bobby Joe a hippie too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jeff opened an appliance repair business. Bobby Joe worked for a real estate company in Breckenridge. She'd often hitch a ride to work. Back then, many people did.
People would look for you. They saw you standing by the side of the road, they'd pick you up.
Still, Jeff knew trouble could be just one ride away. So he had handmade Bobby Joe a secret weapon.
It was a large brass clip, very heavy, with a large brass ring attached to it, and it was made for self-defense.
January 6th, 1982. Bitter cold with snow in the forecast. Bobby Joe hitched to work, where that same afternoon she'd be pleasantly surprised. A job promotion. She called Jeff with the good news and told him she planned to celebrate with friends after work and would be home soon.
Okay, everything's good.
But when Bobby Joe wasn't home by midnight, he got worried and drove to the home of the friends Bobby Joe had been celebrating with.
Woke him up, asked him, where Bobby was, if they knew, and she would know.
And it wasn't like her to not come home.
Oh, not at all.
Jeff went to the Breckenridge Police Department, but was told it was too soon to file a missing persons report. So he headed back to Alma alone.
The phone rang, I think, about 7:45. It was a rancher. He had found her driver's license and some of the contents of her wallet blowing in his driveway. Oh. Then I knew something was horribly wrong.
Jeff and some friends all headed towards the ranch where Bobby Joe's license had been found.
That's when I spotted her backpack out in the snow. And I got out of the vehicle and went through the snow. That's when I found her glove in the snow. And it was covered in blood. And
a bloody tissue also lay in the snow, but still no Bobby Joe. Jeff went back to their house, and friends headed up Hoosier Pass, the route Bobby Joe usually took home.
they went up with cross-country skis to the pass, and they found her body.
Now, investigators joined Bobby Joe's friends. Spreading out across the stark landscape, Bobby Joe's brass key ring with the hook was found in the parking lot.
That her husband, Jeff Oberholzer, had put together for her to use as a weapon if she needed to.
Former Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Jim Hartke was at the crime scene.
The other item that was found up there was an orange bootie, like an ankle sock. It didn't belong. It didn't fit anything connected with Bobby Joe Oberholzer.
And off the side of the road, in the grim shadows of the mountains, lay Bobby Joe.
The body was frozen. She was fully clothed. Her hands were close together.
One hand had been zip-tied. And Hartke believes Bobby Joe had been shot at close range in the chest. Once a free spirit, the lifeless 29-year-old was placed in a bag. Jeff pleaded to look.
They unzipped the bag, and it was my Bobby Joe.
Did you have any idea who could have done that to your wife?
None.
But Jeff's tears weren't what cops were looking for.
When did police call you in and say, we have some questions for you?
Maybe the next day or so. I told him he's the #1 suspect.
Evidence so far indicates the woman may have been trying to escape into the trees when she was gunned down.
But the investigation was about to become a lot more complicated when police learned of the disappearance of Annette Schnee, who vanished the very same day as Bobby Joe.
They probably just passed each other and didn't even know they would be connected.
The first inkling Cindy French had that her big sister Annette was missing came when her mother answered the family's old rotary telephone.
I heard her on the phone. I heard her start to cry. I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Annette is missing."
All the police could tell the family was that Annette Schnee had vanished. The news seemed inconceivable. Only 21 years old, Annette had left the family's home in Sioux City, Iowa, a year earlier, and seemed to be thriving in Colorado. She had 2 jobs, housekeeper by day and cocktail waitress by night.
And she was friends with her roommates, and the people that she worked at the Holiday Inn at were her friends that she would talk about quite frequently to Mom.
And it was a friend from work who reported Annette missing. It was January 8th, 1982, the day after Bobby Joe Oberholzer's body was found. As soon as older sister Karen Reeson heard the news, she rounded up relatives and headed to Colorado.
What were you thinking could have happened to her in that moment, not knowing?
Knowing she hitchhiked, we figured somebody picked her up. Yeah, we were all hoping she was still alive. You know, you do keep that hope, but in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking not. But you don't want to think that.
As investigators tracked Annette's last movements, they discovered she had actually disappeared the same day as Bobby Joe. But the twist was that Annette vanished hours before Bobby Joe.
Annette was last seen at about 4:30 in the afternoon in Breckenridge. Bobby Joe Oberholzer was last seen in Breckenridge at about 7:30 in the evening.
From the outset, former CBI agent Jim Hardkey suspected the 2 cases might be connected.
It was a pretty all-out effort to find any information from anyone.
Investigators learned that after Annette left her job at the Holiday Inn on January 6th, she had visited a doctor's office and then hitchhiked to a drugstore in Breckenridge. Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple showed us where that drugstore once was located.
So she went in to get some medication. She went in to get some medication here. She was talking to a woman that we've never been able to identify, and that was the last time she was seen.
Cindy says not knowing the details of Annette's disappearance haunted their mother.
I know Mom would just say, "I just want to know why, how, you know, that's all I want to know. Nobody can give it to me. Nobody knows why or how."
And in a strange turn of events, Jeff Oberholzer, already a suspect in his own wife's murder, told police when and where he thought Annette's body might be located.
Well, how would you know that?
I've always had different premonitions all my life. I had told them that I felt that she'd be found 4 miles from my house on the 4th of July.
It's pretty specific.
Yeah, and it wasn't far off. That sure made me look pretty bad.
In fact, when Annette's body was discovered nearly 6 months after she vanished, Jeff's premonition turned out to be scarily accurate. She was found on July 3rd, 1982, a day before Jeff's prediction, and her body was roughly 7, not 4 miles from Jeff's house. It was a young boy who came across the crime scene.
He was fishing and found her. Reported it to his dad, and the dad called the sheriff's department.
Charlie McCormick, a private investigator hired by the Schnee family, says Annette was lying face down and fully clothed in Sacramento Creek, about 23 miles from the drugstore where she was last seen.
But she'd been shot once in the back, exit wound, front, on a downward angle of about 30 degrees.
So what does that tell you?
Could be she was on her knees. Could be she was running down a hill away from her, the person who shot her.
Authorities suspected Annette might have been sexually assaulted.
Evidence kind of indicates that her clothing was found in disarray.
Her blue jeans zipper was broken. We believe that the shoes were on the wrong feet when she was found.
Former CBI agent Hartke attended Annette's autopsy, and his eye was drawn to something that would forever change the course of the investigation.
On her left foot, I noticed an orange booty. And in my mind, I'm remembering the orange booty that was found at the top of Hoosier Pass, very close to where Bobby Joe Oberholzer's body was found. And I'm saying, holy shit, this is amazing. This ties the cases together.
Up until that point, Hartke says investigators never knew what to make of that orange sock or booty from the Bobby Joe crime scene.
It was just one of those mysterious things that you pick up at a crime scene.
Kipple believes Annette lost her orange sock in the killer's vehicle, and there it remained until hours later when he picked up Bobby Joe and attacked her.
She jumps out, and when she jumped out of the truck, the orange sock gets kicked out of the truck.
And that sock was not the only piece of evidence found on Annette's body. In the pocket of her jacket, they discovered a business card like this one with a familiar name, Jeff Oberholzer. Jeff told police he recalled giving Annette a ride in November 1981 when she was out hitchhiking. Jeff says that at the time, he was promoting his appliance repair business with those cards.
I gave them to everyone.
So now police know that you had met Annette.
Yes.
Did that add to their suspicion?
Oh, yes.
Jeff, did you have anything to do with the murder of your wife, Bobby Joe?
Not a thing, nothing.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Annette Schnee?
Nothing, no.
Despite now being connected to the two murdered women and having that very accurate premonition, Jeff eventually was cleared. His blood type did not match the blood found on Bobby Joe's glove and the nearby tissue. And as advances were made with DNA technology, Jeff's DNA was not a match.
I told him, I said, Jeff, in my book, you're not a suspect.
But after nearly 40 years, could DNA help identify the real killer in the murders of Bobby Joe and Annette? Early in 2020, Kipple and her team decided to try and find out.
And I said, let's try this genealogy thing. Maybe it can work for us.
She sent the DNA sample generated from the Bobby Joe investigation to United Data Connect. The Denver company runs crime scene DNA profiles through publicly available genealogical databases.
On January 9th, 2021, I get a phone call from the genealogist, says, I have 2 more names for you. And one of those turned out to be the one. I knew from the start this was going to come down to DNA.
In January 2021, Park County Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple got a call about those new DNA test results. And it turned out there was not 1, but 2 possible matches for blood found on Bobby Joe's glove and that tissue that were recovered back in 1982.
I'll never forget the day I got that phone call, and I got those names.
And what were the 2 names you were given?
Alan Phillips and Bruce Phillips.
69-year-old Alan Lee Phillips and his older brother, Bruce Phillips. Kipple reached out to Bruce first. According to Kipple, Bruce said he never lived in Colorado, but that his brother, whom he was estranged from, had. And when Kipple dug deeper, she discovered that not only had Alan Phillips previously lived just outside Breckenridge and worked in a local mine.
Alan Phillips still lived nearby. He had his own mechanic shop, and he was still here.
Phillips had been married 3 times and had a daughter and 2 stepsons. Kipple wanted to learn more about Phillips' past.
When I looked at his criminal history, it showed that he had been arrested in 1973 for assault and burglary, and that just kind of set off all kinds of red flags.
So she set out to find the arrest file, but she was met with dead end after dead end. The courts had no record of the case. Neither did the DA's office.
I knew I had to find that case file, so I went over to the archives for the sheriff's office. There was a fire, and a lot of them were destroyed.
But Kipple was undeterred. She says she combed through hundreds of boxes and filing cabinets, finding nothing until
I get down to the last filing cabinet.
Are you kidding me? The last one?
The last filing cabinet, and even down to the second to the last drawer. Halfway back, I see this tab says Alan Phillips.
Wow.
I was like, this is it. This is our golden egg right here.
in that police report from July 1973, nearly a decade before the murders of Annette and Bobby Joe, Kipple found a signed confession from Phillips, then just 22 years old, explaining how he attacked a young woman.
The first sentence reads, I saw a woman hitchhiking on the south edge of Breckenridge, and I stopped and gave her a ride over to Fairplay. And then he goes on and describes what he did to her.
What Kipple read was chilling. Phillips said that he stopped at an empty cabin along the road, pulled the girl from the Jeep, and then picked up a rock and used it to hit her several times.
When I saw that first sentence, I was like, this is him. This is our guy.
Incredibly, the young woman who didn't want her identity revealed was able to convince Phillips to let her go, and later reported the incident to police.
Did he say in that confession why he did it?
He didn't know. He told her, I don't know why I do this.
I mean, that makes your skin crawl.
Yeah.
Phillips was charged with assault and burglary and served 6 months behind bars. Kipple also learned that Phillips's name had come up in connection with the double murder back in 2005, when an anonymous caller gave a tip to Crime Stoppers. Investigators checked it out, but according to Kipple, the lead went cold when the information couldn't be verified. But now Kipple was confident. She was on the verge of nabbing a killer who had eluded them for decades. There was only one thing left to do.
We had to get surreptitious DNA. That's what we needed.
So you're looking for anything he's throwing out?
Anything.
In late January 2021, Kipple and her team began secretly surveilling Phillips. It turned out obtaining a sample of his DNA wasn't easy.
He wouldn't throw anything away. He didn't even throw out his garbage.
Where did he put his garbage?
I don't know.
Burned it?
That wasn't the only challenge.
This guy's kind of a hermit. He stays at home. He doesn't interact with people too much.
Finally, after 5 weeks, there was a break. Phillips left his home and went to a Sonic drive-in.
We're all like sitting there watching and he gets his food, eats, and then he leaves. I'm like, dang it, he didn't throw his trash away.
So Kipple and her team followed Phillips as he drove to a post office. He walked in carrying the Sonic bag, but on the way out, he was only holding mail. The second Phillips pulled away, investigators recovered that all-important bag from this trash can.
It's like, okay. That
bag was like gold.
It was like gold.
Yeah.
The bag was taken to a lab where Phillips' DNA was pulled from saliva on a napkin.
And what were the results?
It was Alan Phillips' blood that was on Bobby Joe's glove and that Kleenex.
Nearly 40 years after the murders of 2 women near Breckenridge, investigators make an arrest in this cold case.
On February 24th, we arrested Alan Lee Phillips.
I got to put the handcuffs on him. And he was shocked.
Really?
The look of shock on his face is just priceless.
Alan Lee Phillips was initially charged with 2 counts each of first-degree homicide, kidnapping, and assault. He denied any involvement in the crimes. For the families of Bobby Joe and Annette, it was a moment nearly 4 decades in the making, one they thought might never come.
That was a shock. The way that they were able to get the DNA to find him and catch him was amazing.
Truthfully, I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime.
It was just mind-blowing, jaw-dropping. I didn't know what to think.
Is it like relief all at once, too?
Yes, a relief. And you're happy, but yet it doesn't take the hurt away.
But the surprises didn't end there. In another strange twist after Phillips' arrest, a local man recalled a harrowing story of how he helped rescue Phillips from a snowstorm the very night of the murders.
When I heard this story, my mind was blown.
Look through more of the evidence in the case at 48hours.com.
Where are we? Describe where we
This
are.
is Guanella Pass. Like you see now, with the wind and everything, the clouds, well, that's the way it is up here all the time.
On January 6, 1982, just hours after Bobby Joe and Annette were murdered, an airline passenger looked down at Guanella Pass from a plane flying overhead and saw lights flashing. He recalled it was SOS, a call for help. It came from the driver of a truck stranded in a raging snowstorm.
His rear end sunk in the snow, so his headlights were pointing up.
Dave Montoya was a fire chief at the time who also worked in the local mines.
And lo and behold, here comes the plane. He sees it, flashes, SOS, SOS. Well, he didn't know if somebody saw him or not, but he took the chance. Well, somebody did see him in the Arapahoe County Sheriff.
Yeah.
The passenger notified the pilot, who radioed down the approximate coordinates to dispatchers on the ground.
So I was down there, I had my radio with me. So I said, let me go check it out.
Or what were you thinking as you're driving?
I'm thinking, who does that? I thought it was a tourist. I thought, that crazy tourist. He got up here, now he's gonna ask us all to save him.
But when Montoya arrived at the scene, he saw it wasn't a tourist. It was someone he knew, a man named Alan Phillips.
And he comes running out, he says, man, am I glad to see you. I says, Alan, what the hell are you doing?
You knew who he was?
I knew who he was because I worked with him in the mines. He says, well, I got drunk. And I decided to come home and I didn't want to go on the highway to get caught. So I went over the pass because the cops ain't there.
Did you happen to notice anything about him at the time?
Yeah, he had a big old cut right here on the eye.
Montoya says when he asked him how he got the injury, Phillips said he hit his face on his truck.
I kind of laughed. I said, boy, you are really stupid.
Montoya says Phillips refused medical treatment and he dropped him off near his home. He gave an oral statement to police about the incident. That week, local newspapers reported the unusual rescue and included a photo of the then 30-year-old Alan Phillips.
If I would have known what I known then, I probably would have left him.
Montoya would only learn in 2021, after Phillips' arrest, that he was potentially involved in the murders of Bobby Joe and Annette.
Who has luck like that? Really, you commit 2 murders, you get stuck at the top of a pass trying to flee the scene and everything else, and you get stuck where you know you're probably gonna die, and you ask for mercy and you get it. God gave him the mercy, but he says you're not gonna get away forever. You got your mercy, but you gotta pay.
Phillips may have escaped back then, but now, 40 years later, Alan Phillips's fate would be in the hands of a jury. On August 31st, 2022, Alan Lee Phillips' double murder trial began in Fairplay, Colorado. Annette's sisters and brother flew in from across the country to be there.
But we wanted to make sure that the family was represented, you know, that when the jury looks over, you want them to see the concerned, not leftovers, but the left behinds.
At times, seeing Phillips in court was painful for Annette's sister, Cindy.
I was disgusted. You got to live 40 years of your life. You took my sister. To see him sit there so emotionless, no emotion whatsoever, just very stoic, was very frustrating.
Because of the DNA match, did you think this is a slam dunk in a trial?
To me, it's a slam dunk, but to attorneys, they have ways to make it not seem like such a slam dunk.
And that's what Phillips' defense team set out to do. They would question the validity of the DNA and other evidence, and instead blame Jeff Oberholzer for murdering his wife and Annette Schnee, even though he had been cleared by investigators years before.
They pointed the finger at Jeff every step of the way. It's so maddening because that's not where the evidence led to.
When Jeff took the stand, the defense was relentless.
They raked him over the coals, and like he hadn't been through all this for the last 40 years.
They definitely wanted to put the crimes back on me, the murders back on me. It was quite painful.
The defense claimed Jeff had motive to kill his wife. They said he was angry at Bobby Joe because the day before her murder, she brought home cold pizza. Jeff had told investigators about the pizza years earlier.
I kind of found that a little bit ludicrous. I couldn't fathom Jeff killing Bobby Joe over a cold piece of pizza.
And the defense questioned Jeff about his bizarre behavior, like when he told investigators about that premonition he had about where and when he thought Annette's body would be found. Details the defense argued only the killer would most likely know.
This could be seen as pretty damning to some, right?
And so it was. I just tried to tell the truth and answer the questions.
And what about the DNA evidence against Phillips? Hoping to create reasonable doubt, the defense claimed evidence had been tampered with and mishandled throughout the years.
There was some contamination. It wasn't known, oh, I have to be careful and wear gloves so I don't get my DNA on that item. But the bottom line is the blood that is on Bobby Joe's glove and the tissue was Alan Phillips' blood. How do you explain that?
The prosecution said there was a simple explanation. Alan Lee Phillips was the one and the only one who murdered Bobby Joe and Annette.
I mean, what are the odds that it could be anybody else?
On the glove, it was 1 in 17 quadrillion, which is 2,275,000 times the population of the Earth.
Wow. Phillips's DNA was found on Bobby Joe's belongings, says Wendy Kipple, only because Bobby Joe fought for her life and caused him to bleed.
She was a fighter, and without her being a fighter, we wouldn't have the DNA that we needed to solve this case.
And what about those orange booty socks? DNA testing conducted months before trial revealed that Annette's DNA was on the inside and Bobby Joe's DNA was on the outside of that orange booty sock found on Hoosier Pass, not far from Bobby Joe's body.
So that ties both women to that one sock.
But despite the strong DNA evidence against Phillips, investigator Charlie McCormick was concerned. Would the way DNA was challenged by the defense confuse a jury?
Are they going to buy it? Are they going to understand it?
After 2 weeks of testimony, the case finally went to the jury. Jeff and Wendy were nervous.
Were you worried the jury is going to have reasonable doubt?
I felt that that was possible.
There's always doubt. There's always doubt because you know that there's probably one juror that might hang up everybody, and you never know.
What do you make of the case against Alan Phillips? Join the conversation now on social media.
Tell me what it was like for you waiting for the verdict.
Pins and needles.
On Thursday, September 15th, 2022, the families of Bobby Joe Oberholzer and Annette Schnee anxiously awaited the jury's decision. Was Alan Lee Phillips guilty or not guilty?
It just takes one juror that didn't believe it.
The waiting was the hardest part, says Detective Sergeant Kipple. Thankfully, the jury kept it short.
4 hours and 45 minutes.
The jury's verdict on 8 charges, including 2 counts each of first-degree murder, felony murder, and kidnapping, guilty as charged.
He's going to get what he deserves now. Oh, and I just couldn't believe it was happening. I was so happy.
Tell me about the emotions you were feeling as the verdict was read. Alan Phillips, guilty.
I think I let out a sigh.
For Jeff Oberholzer, justice had finally been served, and decades of suspicion decisively lifted.
And there was a great weight lifted from my shoulders.
We hugged and said, you know, we were happy for him and for us, and that it was over.
Over for everyone.
Over for everyone.
Alan Lee Phillips showed no emotion, but his daughter did.
His poor daughter cried. I felt bad for the family, because what they were going through had to be bad. Because they probably wanted to believe, you know, that he didn't do it.
48 Hours reached out to the Phillips family and legal team for interviews, but they all declined our requests. A little over 7 weeks later, Phillips was back in court for sentencing. His attorney insisted that his client had been wrongfully convicted.
He maintains his innocence, and he maintains that the wrong man is being sentenced.
But Judge Stephen Groom wasn't persuaded and handed down 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
To give him the maximum allowed by law.
He then addressed the families of Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer.
I wish you the best and hope the healing starts today.
But it seems that justice for Annette and Bobby Joe may not be the end of this story. Some investigators believe that the case against Alan Lee Phillips is not yet closed.
There are a lot of lingering questions, but the one main one is, are there more victims? What do you think?
Short answer, yes. And I think there are several that he certainly could qualify for.
There's just no evidence to prove it.
Not yet.
While investigators carry on, 2 families still struggle.
You know, once you give someone your love, you can never take it back. And I don't want to. There's a special place in my heart, and Bobby will always be there.
I was cheated out of 40 years without my sister. We'd still be the best of friends today if she was still here.
He took a really good person away from this world, and it saddens me that we won't ever get to know how she was when she was 30 or when she was 40 or 50.
And because Alan Lee Phillips maintains his innocence, they still have one more agonizing question.
Why? You know, why did you take these 2 beautiful girls?
In honor of Annette and Bobby Joe, Annette's sisters and brother decided to visit where the young women were murdered.
There's the cross.
There it is.
They were there to thank Bobby Joe for fighting back and causing Alan Lee Phillips to leave behind his DNA.
Without her, we wouldn't be here.
Nope.
Thank you, Bobby Joe.
Yes, thank you, Bobby Joe.
At the place where Annette's body was found, they delivered a long overdue message to their sister.
Well, Annette, they caught him. He'll be in prison for the rest of his life. Alan Phillips. Just wanted you to know.
Love and miss you.
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Postmortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.